Okay, hello David, welcome back to another episode of Reverse CSI. How are you today?
I'm very well, Jason. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, David. Now, you and I have been discussing sort of a consolidation, something to improve the efficiency of what we're doing. It's so difficult for us to create these detailed, storyboard would be the wrong term, of course, given the strictest definition of what a storyboard is. But I think that you and I, and hopefully our audience, have come to enjoy these very detailed photo collages that you and I have been creating each week. But it takes so much time to prepare them that I think what we're going to do moving forward will be to, rather than have two separate shows on Wednesdays and Fridays, we're going to consolidate David Hawkins' Reverse CSI to a Friday-only show, which will begin, as we are right now, on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook and all that. And then we'll have the conclusion of each week's show on our subscriber-only channels on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I think I may have forgotten to properly program the stream, unfortunately, and people might be waiting at the wrong link. See, this is what I mean, David. We have so much stuff piling up, it's hard to keep everything straight. So we want to try to get some efficiency going in what we're doing. Yeah, there's going to be a different link, unfortunately, for this video. So we might have a lot of people waiting for a video that isn't playing. I apologize to our audience and to you, David.
Do you want to switch over, or is it?
Well, what's going to happen is people will automatically be sent to the link. I'll post the link into the comments, but why don't we begin with our new show today, our topics that you want to introduce, and I'll take care of letting everybody know where the video can be seen.
All right. Okay. So an amazing discovery is that about 2 days ago, I think, I came across this term MALO, as recorded with a show at the Electronic Visualization Laboratory in University of Illinois, Chicago. And it struck me, and I'll read the full blurb about MALO drama. But the issue that struck me was they seem to have created what they call a virtual wizard, which allows people to communicate through this electronic visualization laboratory to a virtual wizard and other participants on the network. And it struck me, wouldn't it be interesting if Osama bin Laden was a virtual wizard created essentially at the universities in Chicago to ultimately terrify and manipulate public opinion and succeed where maybe a frontal attack on the United States would fail. So I'm going to read from the Electronic Visualization Laboratory what a MALO drama is. Its developer was Samroeng Thongrong. I'm not sure I have his pronunciation correctly. And he's describing a MALO drama, which is an interactive immersive cave, trademark. CAVE stands for Cave Automatic Virtual Environment, trademark, art application that allows users to communicate with a virtual wizard, a magic living object. And the acronym spells out MALO. And you pointed out in our discussion yesterday with your Spanish that MALO, and I checked it this morning, stands in Spanish for bad or villain. Now, wouldn't that be extraordinary if Osama bin Laden never had any real existence, but is planted in our collective minds as a magic living object to whom can be attributed the most extraordinary capabilities, including suspension of the laws of physics. Anyway, and other network participants. The virtual wizard accompanies the user through the multi-dimensional environment. MALO drama is a public exhibition of MFA thesis work by Samroeng Thongrong. Do you know what MFA stands for?
Master of Fine Arts.
Master of Fine Arts. Very interesting. Now, isn't our friend, the bloated blob with the tattoo, right? Isn't he, well, no, he's obviously a master of nothing, but I believe he went to a university.
Master of Fat Arts.
And didn't he study art? Isn't that correct?
I am not sure. I haven't been paying too much attention to him lately, but I'm sorry, David. Again, there's this. It's so complicated to set up one of these multi-stream things with all the different aspects that when something gets screwed up, the unscrewing of it can be quite difficult. So I'm still working on that.
Okay, all right. Let me just. I'll let you get on with that while I rabbit on, as they say. Right. So the date for this drama at the Electronic Visualization Laboratory was over May the 1st to 2000, so to July the 1st, 2001, which presumably meant you could wander into the Electronic Visualization Laboratory and take yourself this through and talk with a virtual wizard, right? So let's go back to your extraordinary collage that we worked on. Let's go back to the main cover page. It was a collage, and we'll pick out some of the high points. So the central tunnel, we put last night a picture of someone who might be a virtual wizard by the name of Osama bin Laden. Now, what lends credence to the possibility he's a creation of the Electronic Visualization Laboratory at the University of Illinois, Chicago, is that there was an exercise called Amalgam Virgo, which is on the other side of the tunnel. And Amalgam Virgo was an exercise that simulated the hijacking of a Boeing 727 or 737, I can never remember which, over Alaska. And it was organized by the RCMP and Canadian forces and American forces. And of course, we have to remember Mr. Swigart is an Air Force veteran. So I'm not saying he organized this. I think it's beyond his ability, because most of his cinematographic skills seem to be pictures of his little cat. I'm sure he's a very nice cat.
Well, we've got him pictured here, David, just doing his usual hacking. It can be up to him or whoever else judges him if it's ethical or otherwise.
Right. So he's looking into a laptop, and at the back of the laptop is the logo of the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists in the City of London, which has deep connections to the Ministry of Defense and cyber wars. Anyway, over the other side of the tunnel in which Mr. Osama bin Laden is standing, you can see the Amalgam Virgo exercise, sort of the frontispiece, where in the middle of the picture is Osama bin Laden, who I'm saying might very well be a virtual identity created by the University of Illinois, Chicago, where the great criminal terrorist psychopath by the name of Bill Ayers was found his place in faculty for decades. So staying with that Amalgam Virgo, you can see that basically what they're doing is they're putting on a simulation, possibly with a virtual wizard, of, and if you go through the book of the exercise itself, you'll find out that there was a hijacking, an electronic hijacking of a 727 or 737 over Alaska. It flew south over Abbotsford, continued south and then turned east, and its target for the exercise, called Amalgam Virgo, was the Capitol building, right? Which is interesting because the Capitol building was probably the target for the fourth plane flown by its electronic wizards that were normally ascribed to that hijacking crew who could barely fly a Cessna. But I digress. The point is about the electronic wizard is he's planted in a network out of Chicago with whom or with which you can communicate the theory that this was an attack organized by Osama bin Laden to any news media that you wish. Now, the Electronic Visualization Laboratory at the University of Illinois, Chicago is connected through to the Northwestern University IT Partnerships, which is a global network primarily using fiber optic links and linking some probably quite nice, but also some probably really nasty people, including various universities in China. And as we know right now, President Trump is attempting to deal with the Chinese and Huawei, which is a leading contender for the 5G monopoly, which I'm going to come to. Going back to the collage, over on the left-hand side, we have a group of teachers who may or may not be evil in the sense of EVIL, but I am absolutely convinced on 911 were linked to this extraordinary network that would allow them to have a real-time ability to watch what was described as the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history, as described by a guy called, what's his name now?
Dr. Thomas Barnett.
Dr. Thomas Barnett, right? So now we've got Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton with their mouth open, right, looking up into the roof of the tunnel with, I guess, an expression of delight, because in the roof of the tunnel, it's a rather ugly-looking object, but I started to Google it when I was discussing it with you for a fiber optic link, and most fiber optics are displayed with nice, brightly colored pictures, whether it's a red or blue or yellow. But there is a concept called dark fiber. And dark fiber apparently is an individual strand that is not being used that can be available for lease by the carrier. And globally now we look at a web, if you will, of fiber, much of which is active. Well, I don't know whether it's much or a little, but most of the data communications, the critical data communications, particularly financial transactions, as I understand, now run over fiber, and they don't run via satellite. And the problem for satellite communications and GPS timing is it can easily be hacked and spoofed and interfered with. But modern financial transactions in particular require very fast authenticated timing stamps on them to prove that I sell my Boeing shares, before the planes crashed, etc., and not after they crashed, whatever. And our friend Mr. Swigert is very interesting because he was working in Luxembourg with an outfit called Eurosign, which handles these very fast transactions, or the authentication of these fast financial transactions. And in his wisdom, Mr. Swigert decided that they needed to have timestamps on the transactions to have authentication or certification. And he went to a company called Digistamp in Chicago. Digistamp has changed its name to eStamp. But what I find particularly interesting is Mr. Swigert, who spends a great deal of time criticizing you and pontificating about the dangers of an attack in Charleston, and I'm quoting from memory, with some cesium which might have been taken from the residuals of a dentist chair. I don't really understand the significance of that. And in conjunction with a firecracker, would not represent a threat to the port of Charleston any worse than dropping a light bulb in the car park of Walmart. So the guy is seriously confused, but I digress. I've worked with cesium-137. It's a pretty dangerous material, and it depends, of course, on the amount that you have and whether you mixed it with, let's say, a thermite incendiary device. And potentially, Mr. Swigert or his brother could have threatened the closure of the port of Charleston. Again, I digress. So in this tunnel, you have one Barack Hussein Obama lecturing at the University of Chicago. And what's a very interesting lecture, it appears to me, with my background in industrial management and finance, that what he's describing is a method of America's corporate and banks and utilities, quite possibly it's, and he draw that down dollar sign, and the lecture apparently is headed or addresses relationships of a self-interest. Well, I guess that describes the sum of, Barack Hussein Obama.
Built on self-interest.
Built on self-interest, right? So now, what are we looking at here? The possibility that the whole notion of an attack of 911 was built on the idea of a virtual wizard, where they created in Chicago the various attributes of this guy that they felt would be persuasive to the sheep in the United States. And I don't say that your sheep are any different from our sheep in Canada, or our sheep in the United Kingdom, or our sheep in New Zealand, or our sheep in Australia. Essentially, though, however, for me, it was an attack on the Five Eyes countries that have been collaborating since World War II. Now, how would we distinguish between an attack by a virtual wizard and an attack by a real human being? Well, let's say, hypothetically, Osama bin Laden was a genius general, organizer, with great resources at his disposal, and he really was able to put on an attack. The attack that took out the Pentagon, or the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center, appears to have tunneled through the Pentagon and come out the other side through 8 reinforced walls, created a 1.5 tons of debris on the inside wall, and within 10 minutes of impact, there's a group of people on the outside of the Pentagon lawn picking up evidence and taking it away. Now, why wouldn't Mr. Swigart, with his background in simulation, ethical hacking, time-stamping, etc., have access to a computer perhaps lent to him by the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists, such that he was able to switch during an exercise, a continuity of government exercise on 911, from a simulation to a live fire event? How would the public in the United States distinguish between a Swigart-driven switch and an attack by a virtual wizard called Osama bin Laden? Well, maybe I could throw that in your court, Jason. How do you think, from a cinematographic point of view, the public could distinguish between a virtual wizard attack and a real human being attack? Over to you.
Well, David, I think it could be virtually impossible. And, you know, when you ask from a cinematographic point of view, I'm caused to think about some famous films like the movie The Sting, where it's one group double-crossing another group, double-crossing another group, and even as an audience member who's being told all sides of the story, it's often difficult to sort out exactly what's going on. So again, Swigart will undoubtedly, either deliberately or due to his general dull sense, misconstrue what we're saying and file an uncountable number of legal motions to try to accuse us of doing something. But I think the point that we're getting at is this could be done in such a way that even Swigart wouldn't know. You know, he is an ethical hacker, and when he's hacking in to test the resilience of something or to compromise something, the question then becomes, how does he, or how does any ethical hacker know that there isn't some piggyback hacker, or that the ethical hack is not an umbrella operation for an unethical hack? You know, we've heard from Cody Snodgrass that the Oklahoma City bombing of the Murrah building there, the Oklahoma City bombing, you know, with Timothy McVeigh, was an umbrella operation for the actual operation, which involved a huge bomb in the basement of the building. So my question is, if we know that that's a tactic that's utilized by certain deep state operations, or whatever we want to call them, clandestine operations, how do we know that an ethical hacker wouldn't be unwittingly employed to create a cover for some other penetration of a system that might go undetected in the presence of a simultaneous ethical hack?
You're absolutely right, Jason. You know, you've nailed it. And there are ways, and I think that's what I would like our contributors to your program and my program to understand, that you and I are working on this storyboard formula where, for example, students and alumni at any university, but let's say hypothetically University of Illinois, Chicago, could monitor what's going on in this evil Batcave, where they appear to be creating virtual wizards or magical wizards, right? That can stage an event in the eyes or the mind of the public at large, where they're literally trying to manipulate or socially engineer a perception based on a lie or a falsehood. And the mechanism that you and I are creating, I think we pioneered it, and I hope our listeners understand. And again, it's not an appeal for money, but I think, given that we're up against some truly well-financed operations, and let me just give an example. When Serco met, shareholders met on the 47th floor of the North Tower prior to the demolition of that building, there were, I presume, about, you know, their institutional shareholders, there might have been 100 or 150 people at that meeting. I believe it was hosted by Serco's investment banker, Wilbur Ross. Now, can I prove it? No, but it would be nice to know where Wilbur was on 911 and what the hell he was doing. It would also be very nice to know what Serco shareholders were doing on the 47th floor. So let me just remind people of who the Serco shareholders are. Well, there's two big pension funds. The Teachers Pension Fund in the United States, which is the world's largest private pension fund with $1.5 trillion assets under management. And the other pension fund is the Universities Superannuation Scheme in the United Kingdom, which would have had a big influence on presumably the policy and perspective of the Worshipful Company of Educators. Right? And on the morning of 9/11, the master, as it's called, of the Worshipful Company of Educators, and that is that upper heraldry, where I think there's various ideas there, including pens and what have. Oh, yes, there's the mortis board. Is that what they call? What do they call the hats when students graduate? What are they called? Is that a mortis board?
Graduation cap, as far as I know. I don't know.
Anyway, that's what it is. The master of the Worshipful Company of Educators in London was a plasma physicist. And I forget his name. Sorry, I think Raoul is the first name. But very influential guy, because if you scroll up on the collage, Jason, and take a look at the tower, what we've caught there, or what someone has caught, is the image of the South Tower coming down. The North Tower is still standing. Even though the North Tower was hit first, the South Tower is coming down. Now, I'm an expert in explosives. Now, what I find intriguing, of course, I'm not an expert, well, not of course, but I'm not an expert in demolishing buildings. But the velocity with which 10-ton girders are being thrown out of that building was such, and some of them were traveling on a parabolic arc, they were embedded in buildings adjacent 100 meters away. Well, gravity acts downwards. That wasn't a gravitational collapse. And this comes back to the point of the idea of a virtual wizard. A virtual wizard cannot, in principle, violate the laws of physics. If it was a gravitational collapse, it would fall down. If it was an explosive-driven or munitions-driven event, then there are going to be particles or objects like 10-ton girders thrown out horizontally, and they're going to kill people, right? And they're going to travel a long way. So the building number 1 and building number 2 were hit perhaps by a Boeing aircraft, perhaps not. That's not the question. The chief question is, how were they demolished? Well, it turns out around the period of the MALO show in Chicago, they were cabling the building with fiber optic links.
The World Trade Center building.
I'm sorry?
The World Trade Center building.
Yes, yes. The fiber optic links would allow you to couple the energy or the signal required to trigger a sequence of detonations or ignitions from floor to floor to floor, so you get that top-down demolition effect, where if the reaction temperature of the incendiary is hot enough, if it was thermite, it would be 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit, which is twice the melting point of steel. Now, I'm not enough of a metallurgist to understand how you move from boiling to plasma, but I'm quite sure that professor who was the master of the Worshipful Company of Educators would be able to answer that. And another person who could answer it is John Deutsch, who's an expert in thermodynamics at MIT, and he was the disgraced director of the CIA that was fired by Bill Clinton. And I keep saying, and I don't mean it to be facetious, to be fired by Bill Clinton, you've got to be seriously evil.
Well,
right?
The other important thing to mention about John Deutsch, David, I think, is that he was also the CEO of Schlumberger. And he was...
No, not the CEO, he's a director. He's
a director. But during the time that the Deepwater Horizon was lost, which you told us had to do with something with the cement... I forget.
Yeah, sabotage, cement bond load. Right. But he's also a director of Raytheon. Right. Now, over on the... I'm trying to be very focused here, but over on the bridge, one of the defense contractors on the Federal Bridge, which Mr. Swigert knows a great deal about, right, is Raytheon. He also with Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and what's the other one? Lockheed Martin. All of whose assets were required to be synchronized for the attack of 9/11, not by an electronic or virtual wizard, by a team of people working from inside the gates. we're dealing with treason on a massive scale, Jason, right? Aided and abetted by enemies in the Five Eyes countries without the knowledge and consent of the average Brit or the average Canadian or the average New Zealander or the average Australian, right? So this is a serious attack from within. But back to the tower coming down. So as you go up and see this tower coming down, tower number 1 that was hit second came down rather sometime later. The interesting thing to me is what happened to the shareholders of Serco on the 47th floor of the North Tower? Were any of them hurt? Were any of them frightened? Were any of them intimidated? Were any of them bribed? Back to the shareholders, you have 2 big pension funds with $1.5 trillion of assets under management, and I'm matching that with student debt, which is about $1.5 trillion. Where I'm coming, and we've discussed that very briefly, we haven't gone into it in some detail, I think a very equitable remedy for odious student debt, where they're being forced to look for careers in the myth of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, would be to consolidate the teachers' pension fund without intending to screw the teachers, with the student debt without intending to screw the students. And basically, when you put those together, in my book, rather simplistically, you have a very beneficial alliance. Teachers need to be teaching students what they need to learn to get a job so that they can ultimately pay off their loans. Why pay a great deal of money to go to a university like, let's say, Northwestern University, and listen to Bernardine Dawn give a lecture on torture, paradigms, and practice, right? Which might explain why the victims, because we have a victim tunnel, why some of those victims died a hideous death, way above what was necessary to kill them. Like little John Benet Ramsey, if you want to kidnap a child and collect $118,000 per the ransom note, it is not necessary to sodomize her, taser her, garrote her, and smash her skull in, and then leave a ransom note with on the bottom, victory, exclamation mark. For me, that's the kind of behavior or script that might be written by a Bernardine Dawn who lectures on torture, paradigms, and practice.
Well, and it's important to mention, David, that you have told us before how Bernardine Dawn instructed members of the Weather Underground to kill in the most violent and horrendous way they could think of, and stabbed Sharon Tate in the stomach with a fork while she was pregnant.
Yes, I mean, the woman is a psychopath. She should have been on death row a long time ago, but she's now serenaded or worshipped by sycophants at the university, Northwestern University. But the point is, what's happened in Chicago now, you've got a malicious, malign group of people who I believe are dealing out virtual wizards for consumption by a credulous public. Now, over to the left of that left-hand tunnel, Jason, we got some interesting logos. And I would like to warn Americans on what's heading their way if they don't wake up. So over on the left, you got the logo of the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, where they invented the cesium fountain clock. And below that logo, right, you have Huawei, and I'm just learning how to pronounce that. And Huawei is the Chinese conglomerate that is totally controlled by, I believe, the People's Liberation Army, and it's driving the 5G initiative. And below that you have Serco. Now, Serco provided a case study for the 24th Air Force, which I think is the cyber division of the United States Air Force.
Wow, that sounds like something Mr. Swigert might know something about.
Of course he would. Now, what Serco did is they installed red switch network facility for the 24th Air Force and fiber optic links. So Serco is completely knowledgeable and has completely invaded and infiltrated key United States military departments. And I'm suggesting to President Trump and the junta that runs his cabinet or whatever it was, get Serco out of every government contract you can, because at the moment, Serco is operating your National Visa Center and has been doing so since 1994, which is where the bin Laden sleeper cells came in. They came in through Dubai. They got their visas in Dubai, courtesy of Serco, and they came into the United States, And I believe a number of them were dispersed amongst the small business protege companies assembled by Christine Marcy for the continuity of government exercises on 911. And those small business protege companies went rogue on 911 and nearly decapitated America.
Now, let's just pause there for a second, David, because I want to flesh some of this out for people. So you're basically saying almost the entire purpose of the show that you and I are doing is to instruct the people of the United States and the President of the United States that this company Serco, which there's plenty of documented information that they've been involved in numerous scandals to rip off taxpayers in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, for claiming to transport prisoners, but in fact the prisoners were dead. The transport was not actually happening. They're just basically a company that's in the business of scamming. So for this reason, you and I feel very strongly that they should not have the incredibly lucrative and influential government contracts that they have in the United States, including contracts for fulfillment having to do with the Affordable Care Act, the controls they have over the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the Visa Center, the FAA contract towers that they control around the world, including some of the largest airports in the world like Dubai and elsewhere. You're basically saying that on the basis of factual evidence that's been presented not only here but elsewhere, that we want this company Serco to be sort of taken out of the mix as far as having anything to do with U.S. government agencies. Wilbur Ross has personally told me that he thinks the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office runs itself, that there's no need for concern that any of these patented technologies could be willfully, negligently, or wrongfully utilized. But that's the message that we're trying to put out there, and anyone who wants to silence us from sharing that message is suppressing our right to explore news, to put out news, to engage in freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And so it draws attention to those that are persistently, week after week, making up fake stories and lies to try to stop you and I, and to try to prevent people, David, from going to our Patreon pages. This is the only way that we fund this program. People can go to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards. That's your page, David. And starting next Friday, that's going to be really the only place to see the show. Patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I also offer the exclusive programming on subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. But this is the way, David, that you and I have determined is the most effective way for us to keep social engineers out of the conversation and to deliver this information to our generous subscribers.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And that's why it's vital to understand what they're doing at a crime scene before the crime actually occurs. As far as I can see, they switch on some of this dark fiber and they link up the insiders. Maybe you might call it a whitelist. I think I picked up that term through you. A whitelist of insiders that need to have a precise concept of time and location for each asset. So, for example, there is a patent taken out by Jerome Lemelson, who's now dead, that was awarded him, where they use artificial intelligence, fuzzy logic, and expert system algorithms. And I wrote the book on expert system procedure in 1981 in a paper, an analysis of expert thinking, where they basically, you need that whitelist of privileged teachers, or let's call them evil teachers, to know the movement and position and timing of every asset that is going to be engaged in the crime before it occurs, right? They will have a script, that is to say, a script that broad brush, subject to the skills of the actors who will be skillful in improvisation. They will have a procedure where they're spotting the target, right, to make sure that the exercise results in the destruction or death of a high-value target. As far as collateral is concerned, that could be financed with what are known as carbon credits that are transacted over this dirty fiber web, where basically you could pay, for example, a worshipful livery company a percentage of the value of the weight of carbon saved when a Boeing aircraft is taken down in Ethiopia or Indonesia as a result of an artificial intelligence algorithm overriding the pilot's attempt to put the nose in the right attitude as it takes off from an airfield. Now, what you've got now is Boeing, one of the best manufacturers of aircraft in the world, is being brought to its knees, I believe, through an attack by a virtual wizard. Right? Now, a virtual wizard, Osama bin Laden is no longer fashionable as a virtual wizard because they shot some elongated guy in Abbottabad up, and they did a bit of photo fitting and face recognition stuff to create the impression this guy was Osama bin Laden. But if Osama bin Laden was always a virtual wizard, the guy that got shot in Abbottabad still is a virtual wizard, but you know, the poor guy who died, of course, was very much probably wanting to hang on to life. But you know how they buried that guy?
Chucked him
Jason?
in the water.
They pushed him off the end of an aircraft carrier, right? So there's no possibility of doing a DNA on this guy to see whether or not he was Osama bin Laden. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're so clumsy and so amateurish. And this is, I think, hubris, because they've got this technology where they can create perceptions in the public mind. They've got a social engineering protection appliance that's been invented by Kinetic North America, and they've got a patent for it. And this thing can check the correspondence, the emails that you send, or the people who might think about sponsoring us and helping us turn around the ship, if you will. And they can treat these emails as malicious or criminal. And the computer then will filter it out or transmit it, let's say hypothetically, to that bloated slob in Poland and say, you've got to go after David Hawkins. Can you spend, you know, the 4 weeks of your life trying to prove whether or not he's got a degree in mechanical sciences, tripos? But of course, if the listeners haven't seen this guy, it's really hilarious. But what intrigues me, and again, unfortunately, there's always so limited time, is the way he appears from behind what looks like a first edition book. So he's got the dark glasses. I think he's looking at the camera and he's mumbling something, and then he quivers his body in tune to the music, and then he puts it down and he sounds off about, does David Hawkins have a scholarship from Queen's College? Should he be calling himself a forensic? It's so irrelevant to what you and I are doing.
It is.
And that's the job of social engineers.
Yeah, mostly to distract and to waste time. David, let me ask you this, because we've got some comments coming in here in the chat. We've got Edelson James is very adamant that Serco is involved with the Rose Law Firm, and the Rose Law Firm actually runs the patent office, according to Edelson James, and that Hillary Clinton obviously is connected to the Rose Law Firm. We've heard that Hillary has recently got her law license back. What do we know, David, definitively about the Rose Law Firm and any potential connections to Serco and the patent office?
Well, I believe that Hillary Clinton became the first female partner at Rose Law, and she worked in intellectual property around the 1978-79 period, when she was a young leader of the French-American Foundation with Bill Clinton. And I believe she made several trips to Paris. She would be very familiar with AXA BNP Paribas, which is a shareholder in Serco. But one of the deals that she brokered was the patent for the quartz rate sensor 11, the QRS-11 gyro chip, which goes into Raytheon Maverick missiles. And unfortunately for America, some of these technologies found their way into China's hands,
right?
Possibly or probably aided and abetted by John Shalikashvili, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was sent by Bill Clinton treasonously to Beijing in 1997 to give a presentation to the People's Liberation Army. And incidentally, Huawei was founded by a former member of the PLA in China. But at the end of his speech, and it may have been scrubbed from the web, John Shalikashvili says, "I've been instructed by my president to leave behind details of all America's weapons programs, which would presumably include the modification to Boeing aircraft so that they could carry the QRS-11 gyrochip brokered by Hillary Clinton, and they could fly as drones, which is what they did on 911.
Now, David,
Right?
I'm just looking. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just looking up Hillary Clinton intellectual property, and we've got this Hillary Clinton's IP litigation experience at IP Litigation Current that says many people are surprised to learn that Hillary Clinton was an intellectual property attorney when she practiced law from 1977 to 1972. But when I click on it, look, not found.
Yeah, well, they're scrubbing the internet. You know, scrubbing is a term that's used in that split tunnel patent about scrubbing objectionable sites, which are presumably they're trying to do with you and me. But just going back to Hillary Clinton to address that question.
Yeah.
The point is, Hillary Clinton is an intellectual property lawyer, as is Michelle Obama. So it occurs to me, if you want to create a virtual wizard, right, that is able to go around the world and drive ISIS and some of the appalling atrocities that ISIS visited on people, including burning them alive, this would be very much in the kind of genre of Bernardine Dawn's torture paradigms and practice. The level of torture and brutality visited on the victim is way above what's necessary if you want to kill them, you know, if it's contract hit. Like poor Gareth Williams, who was a brilliant cryptographer working at GCHQ, he was put in a bag folded three ways, a sports bag. Now, we don't know where he was killed, but it could very possibly have been Fort Meade, right? The NSA place, where Maureen Baginski would understand very well what a threat Gareth Williams presented, because he'd broken into the Bill Clinton diary. And presumably he'd followed Bill Clinton through the diary, a virtual tracking, if you will, to the island owned by Jeffrey Epstein, where he could be serviced by underage children and quite possibly drill holes through their teeth with that dentist chair. So the level of brutality, this is intended to send a message. I mean, the network we're talking about, let's call it the dirty fiber network, right, is based on fear. There's a lot of people who got caught up in that. Maybe they've traded illegally on the stock market. Maybe they haven't paid their taxes. Maybe they got drunk one night and ended up in a bar and ended up in a bed with a child beside them, you know, that's dead, you know, a bit like The Godfather. This is based on fear, and we're not going to be able to unravel that network, Jason, until we can't lift the fear, but we need something like a reconciliation agreement that they came to in South Africa, where people who didn't actually do a dirty deed while they were conscious or while they were able to prevent themselves from doing it, let's say they were heavily drugged or someone had a gun to the head of their children, we need to open up the light into this. Basically, I'm talking about accountability and transparency. So the idea of students and alumni doing a reverse engineering job, if you will, on these virtual wizards to determine whether or not a human being, let's say the real Osama bin Laden, could do what was done on 911, or whether a virtual wizard, given the access to the kind of networks that could send drones on a precision track, possibly with a Hillary Clinton gyroscope, into the Pentagon through 8 reinforced walls and create a hole on the inside, whether it requires a real network of military-grade skill sets combined with the guilds of the City of London that go back to the 13th century. Over to you.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, David. I'm trying to stay on top of everything you're saying. I'm still looking for this link related to Hillary Clinton's IP litigation background, and I think there should be a way to find it here. But yeah, somehow the link on this iplitigationcurrent.com is broken. So this is from 2016. People are suggesting that I go to the Wayback Machine. It's a good idea.
There is an article, if I may interrupt, Jason, I think 5 degrees of separation, Hillary Clinton, LIPO, and BEI. That will probably give you the background to the QRS-11 gyro chip that was illegally exported by Boeing, right, for which they paid a fine, not just for the QRS-11 gyro chip, but they paid a fine of $615 million for exporting important strategic material to China. right? So right now, China is getting ready for World War III, in my opinion. Right? They've stolen everything that isn't actually nailed down, and if it's nailed down, they take the thing that has been nailed to. Nothing against individual Chinese, but basically that momentum that has been established. And if you go into the Northwestern IT partnerships, you'll see the list of countries that are linked through to, let's say, Northwestern University, where the faculty, I think, is the right word, directed? Probably not. But let's say dominated by Bernardine Dawn. I mean, the woman is a terrifying human being. She's a psychopath. She invented, as I understand it, the three-fingered fork salute to describe, the murder of Sharon Tate, who was pregnant. They stuck a fork in her belly, and she invented, or at least adopted, the three-finger salute, and said something about, crazy. They stuck a fork in the pigs. This woman is an animal. Yeah, you've got China there, City of Chicago. So how many cities are on that list? But then you've got China, and if you Google further down, you've got Russian Federation, right, and the Republic of Korea. Well, how much information goes back through the Republic of Korea to North Korea, to that Kim Jong-sun, who's another psychopath? So what America has been doing is it's been exporting all of the technologies required for its weapons to defend itself against an attack. And so it's no surprise, of course, that on 9/11, it stood down for what I think was an electronic wizard. Over to you.
Yeah, it's definitely an amazing array of connections. President Xi of China, I think just yesterday, said that there's going to be a people's war because Trump is being greedy, and Xi is not liking these tariffs. I am not an economist, obviously. Difficult for me to evaluate President Trump's plan as far as tariffs goes, but I think that there's been a trade deficit with China for many years, and the concept of trying to even that out seems like it's in the interest of the people of the United States. So we've got this iplitigationcurrent.com that I'm trying to reach here. I really want to see what this has to say about Hillary Clinton. IP litigation.
While you're doing that, Jason, could we go over to that left-hand tunnel? Because I want to give people a warning about Huawei's goals or potential goals and the threat that this has for the kind of crimes we saw with the London Underground bombing or the 9/11 attack. So over on the left-hand side of that left-hand tunnel, we've got these logos, Huawei 5G, we've got Serco, and we've got the National Physical Laboratory where they invented the cesium fountain clock. Now, people should understand that from 1994 to about 4 or 5 years ago, Serco ran the National Physical Laboratory, right? And included in that service, of course, is what was developed and called time over fiber, which actually replaces the problems associated with GPS time, because with time over fiber, you're transmitting an optical signal at the speed of light through the cables, which at one end, so to speak, are plugged into the clock, which is the most precise clock in the world that neither loses nor gains a second every 168 million years. But that allows you to front run any other timing system. So, for example, on 911 in the Pentagon, I imagine some people looked at their watch and say, what the hell was that noise? And the watch shows something that's 5 minutes or whatever. Up on the wall, there'd be another clock that shows something. But out over the internet with this virtual wizard, or the electronic wizard, he or she knows exactly the time to within a millisecond. Now, what that means is, as the instructions were being handed out through the National Command Authority on how to respond excuse me, to this attack by bin Laden, the attackers, the red team attackers, and I believe the red team leader, sometimes Swigart describes himself as a red team leader.
Well, we should have made his outfit red.
Oh, yes, yes. If the red team leader knows the time to within a few milliseconds, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was in a plane heading over the Atlantic, General Shelton, who actually wasn't allowed to come back into American airspace. That's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All right, he may not have known the time to more than an accuracy of second. The red team will always defeat the blue team, and that's what happened on 911. The blue team was stood down through this dirty fiber network controlled by Serco and the evil teachers. The red team was stood up. They knew the precise time, and when Captain Gerald DeConto, the duty officer of the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, saw the weapons platform coming towards him, it actually hit him between the eyes, if you will, and killed 125 of his colleagues. And I don't see any tears being shed by the administration for that. What would have happened is he realized that the oncoming weapons platform was transmitting friend signal. So he called the Secretary of the Navy, Gordon England, and asked for permission to override the software clamps or the AI clamps on the missiles on the roof of the Pentagon to take out this. And Gordon England stalled. Right?
How do we know that?
Well, it's in the literature, because you'll have to just check that. Captain Gerald DeConto and Gordon England, Secretary of the Navy, and the word stalled. Now, those are all circumstantial evidence. We never have direct evidence of what happened at the crime scene. But consistent, going back to my theory, you need to test the empirical evidence, like there was a delay or there was a failure to launch the missiles from the roof of the Pentagon and take out the oncoming thing that took it out. That's evidence. I mean, it's not in dispute. Whatever hit the Pentagon punched a hole through 8 walls. Now, can an electronic or a virtual wizard do that? Obviously, the answer is no. But could a network which is connected to an identity, a virtual identity, Osama bin Laden, could that do it? Absolutely, because it's got access to the military devices. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence, the massive destruction, the lack of airplane parts, the fact that it went through so many walls here and so few walls at the World Trade Center, and the fact that a plane just could not fly that low to the ground and that fast and crash into the building. So remains
Can we just mention Cass Sunstein, because I think this relates to the social engineering.
Let's do that.
So what they've orchestrated is a electronic wizard, a performance of virtual art, if you will, to create the impression in the public's minds they're under an attack by a long-bearded fellow straddling a yak in a cave in Afghanistan. Now, what is this guy's speciality? He's actually seems to be a leader of social engineering, because he's defined and written books on artificial intelligence and conspiracy theories. I think one of the books is Conspiracy Theories and Other Dangerous Ideas, and he's been lecturing at I think the University of Chicago, where Obama lectured for 27 years. So he's on faculty. He's obviously very bright. He's got I think his forehead's a bit like mine, but maybe as an engineer we don't have the same kind of thought processes. I pray that I don't. But this guy is basically saying any conspiracy theory other than the originating government's theory needs to be treated as a dangerous idea and basically sterilized or scrubbed. Now, for me, I would think the university should kick him out, because he should be teaching truth to students. If I was lecturing at that university, I think I would be showing students, how do you ground truth? A theory that there is a human being out there capable of wreaking this level of destruction on a sovereign state like the United States of America. How do you distinguish between that and electronic or virtual wizardry? Now, you have an extraordinary piece of technology called Phantasma VR.
Right.
And so I look at that and I watch it, and I believe, if I understand correctly, it's the Houdini Magic Museum.
Yes.
And you have this 360. I think it's so impressive, and I think the listeners really ought to look at what you're capable of, Jason, what I'm capable of, and please help fund us, because this is a struggle. We're up against an organization, or a couple of organizations, with trillions of dollars of assets under management, able to buy 100 social engineers like Swigart and that tattooed blob in Poland, right? And they throw these kind of people at us. They don't have a B team, and we, I think, to put it arrogantly, we have an A team.
You mean they don't have an A team?
They have a B team. They don't have an A team. We have an A team, but we don't have their resources.
Yeah.
So it's not a beggar's bowl type request, but if we could get a viral funding formula in place so that you and I can be not plucked from poverty, I don't pretend that I'm poor, but to start putting the kinds of assets needed to stage, let's say, a show at the EVL Batcave in Chicago, where we actually demonstrate the techniques of ground truthing so that students and alumni can ground truth these odious theories, for example, that carbon dioxide is the main driver of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, when there's no such thing as catastrophic anthropogenic global warming. Anthropogenic means home-based. So anyway, I don't want to rabbit on too long, but that would be my position.
Well, I appreciate that, David, and thank you for your kind words about Phantasma VR. That's a virtual reality production that I did several years ago, and we've shown it here on the show before. People can go to the 21st Century 3D YouTube channel and still see it there. It basically allows people to go, as you've described, on a virtual tour of the Houdini Museum here in New York City. And it's an example of one type of virtual reality technology. And I like that, you know, we're talking about the EVL Batcave. Again, that's not our nomenclature. That's the name that they came up with for their own Batcave, calling it EVL, having the MALO system. It's interesting that they're choosing those. I mean, they didn't name it the Disney Princess, advanced visual environment, and they didn't name it the Kind Cave or anything like that. It's the EVL Cave, according to these guys. So they say it's
Can I
evil.
just sorry, it's very rude of me if I could interrupt, Jason. Just as you're going in a tour with Phantasma VR of a magic museum in New York, right? Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that you and I can show students and alumni how to go on a virtual reality tour of a crime scene. Now, what could be more exciting than that? That is to say, you go into the crime scene at the Pentagon, you look at the empirical evidence, like the hole, you look at the time and the date stamp on the images taken from outside the Pentagon, which says September the 12th, 2001, and 1737-19, and I think that's a clear example that one of the participants in the attack of 9/11 was Bill Clinton, squatting in a restaurant, the Salsa Bar and Grill in Queensland, Australia, which at that time was on September the 12th, 2001, because of the date line. 1737-19 corresponds, as far as I can tell, the time from the Dubai air traffic control tower, which was staffed and run by Serco on 9/11.
Right.
So they were injecting telemetry signals that allowed them to steer the weapon, probably with Hillary Clinton's gyroscope, into the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center and killed 125 brave men and women. And the autopsy, there's been no autopsy, there is no de facto effective crime scene investigation. We can remedy that. So help us, folks, to do that. Over to you.
Absolutely. And David, with that, we're just about out of time for today. You know, I'm sorry I was a little behind the 8 ball today trying to get everything organized in time, and we got started with the wrong link, unfortunately. So I hope that people caught up with us and got to see the full show. I'll correct all of that stuff. And starting on Friday, David, we'll be focusing our attention on a single longer show that will span both YouTube and Patreon channels, so people will hopefully join us on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. This model of having many micro sponsors where people are sponsoring between $1, $5, $10 a month, in my view, is much better than having advertisers. There's a lot of people who say they would prefer to have advertisers. I certainly welcome those people to create their own online video programs and finance it with advertisers, but you and I are talking about things that most corporations that invest in advertising don't don't want people to hear about. So the only way this type of thing can be monetized, and it needs to be monetized in order for it to be sustainable. You and I cannot spend all this time doing this if we need to have other jobs to earn money. So it's really important that people become patrons and sponsors of the show by going to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. And of course, David, people can still get access to lots of your media by going to reversecsiscripts.com. That's your website. They can also follow you on Twitter at CSI Hawkins. So people who don't want to sponsor the show but still want to get a lot of information can do that. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap it up right now, David?
No, I'm just looking, I look in awe at that collage you did, and I hope people understand, A, the volume of work and the intensity of thought behind it, because it's a very compelling picture. It's probably the most precise conceptualization of the people behind the attack of 9/11 that they're ever going to see. Over to you.
Well, thank you, David. And actually, this is the highest resolution collage that we've done so far. There's always tons of exciting stuff within these images for people to check out, and we try to go through it during the show. I don't know that we even got a chance to talk about how the FAA contract towers were potentially used by Serco to take airplanes off of their en route airways on 9/11. Of course, we've spoken many times about the BBC and their penchant for injecting fake news. There are a number of people here who have been subjected to fake news stories, including Seth Rich, Lady Diana, Michael Barden. All these people have had a component of fake news involved in their various stories. So, David, thank you once again for joining me today. I want to thank all of our viewers and all of our generous sponsors on Patreon and Subscribestar. And I'm going to have Larry Klayman tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking about John Durham and what Larry expects to see from the just announced investigation of Robert Mueller's investigation. I'll see everybody at 8. Thanks for joining me, David.
Bye, Jason.